Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Closeted Conversations, where we create a safe space to have an open dialogue about our life experiences. I'm Xander. Again, thank you for tuning in. And this month of November, for the next couple of videos, I want to dedicate it to trans issues, being that November is National Trans Awareness Day month, right? And so to start a topic, actually, before we continue, I want to introduce our guest speaker for today. So go ahead and say your name, a little bit about yourself.
Hi, my name is Nia Clark. Pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am 35 years old, originally from Boston, Massachusetts. Go Sox.
Who just won?
Oh, yes, we won. And I am a black trans woman. And I've been living in Los Angeles now for about 4 years.
Awesome. Can you tell me, what is the difference between sex and gender?
So when we understand sex, we think about it this way. When you when someone is pregnant and expecting a child, they usually go and get a sonogram, and the doctor or whomever who's overseeing this will usually at some point indicate what they see on the screen, and they'll indicate whether it's a girl or whether it's a boy. From that point on, everything is determined by that assignment. And so when a baby is actually born, sex is actually literally the parts that you're born with. It is your chromosomes, it's your genetic makeup. It's more physiological,
right,
as opposed to gender. So gender is something that is a social construct. It's something that we individually develop internally over time. Their gender encompasses identity, it encompasses expression, and also perception. So gender identity is really how we see ourselves as it relates to the world. Gender identity also comes with gender roles. So what it is to be ladylike, what it is to man up. When we say don't be a sissy, where do those things come from? They come from expectations that have been received from society, and they're imposed on us. Some of those we embrace and we incorporate in our gender expression. So the clothes we wear, how we style our hair, our mannerisms, right, the way we talk to people. And there are some of those things that we can control. That's what our gender expression is about. It's the gender perception that is often the issue, how people perceive your gender. And there are some cues that you give off based on how you express yourself that you can control. And we were talking about the clothes you wear, jewelry, things like that. But then there are some gender cues that you can't control. Those are things like height, how your face is framed, how fit you are, how broad your shoulders are. And we see examples of people conflating gender and sex all the time. So look at someone like Serena Williams. People, how many times have you heard Serena Williams is not a woman? Serena Williams is on steroids. Serena Williams was not assigned female at birth, because of how her body looks to other people. They see it as more masculine. Those are misconceptions around gender and sex. So the difference between sex and gender or gender identity is sex is what is in between your legs. Gender identity, that's what's in between your ears and in your heart.
So the reason why this topic is so important to me, and I'm sure for other folks, is because when it comes to trans folks, there's always that issue of people focusing only on the genitals, right? That is what, in a way, I don't know how to explain it, but if for some reason they just focus on that, right? And I remember one time you explained it so well. You went to one of my classes at CSUN, and you used the phrase, genitals does not equal gender, or was it the other way around, I think? Gender does not equal genitals. There you go, that's the one. And I remember this, what had happened, if you recall, is that, so you came over to class, it was my LGBT socio class at CSUN, and you were having a conversation, and it's it is always so awkward to ask a trans folk, about their genitals, right? It's rude, it's offensive, it's just all the negative things you can think of. And so the example then you gave me when you looked at me was like, well, how big is your dick? or are you cut or uncut? Or you, no, those are very personal questions, right? And for some reason, some folks, especially who are not trans, right? Yeah, I mean only who are not trans, feel compelled to ask that type of question to trans folks. But yet when we get asked that, it's like, oh, but that's too personal.
The thing that happens is what people focus on so much with trans people is their medical transition. When people think about a transgender person, they don't think about the social aspect of being trans. So at the process of coming out, the process of affirming a name for yourself, the process of being out in all aspects of your life, because essentially when I came out of as trans when I was 16, it was like having a second adolescence. I had to learn what worked for me as a woman and how to express that. And a lot of folks may understand what it's like to go through adolescence. What they may not understand is the medical aspect, medically transitioning. Everyone has this, all these cisgender folks that I encounter, whether they're straight or queer, have this misconception that when a trans person transitions, that they all medically transition. And not just medically transition, but get the surgery.
Physically.
They call it the surgery. You know, gender affirmation surgery. And the reality is that is only one part. And not every trans person actually decides to actually medically transition. There's some trans folks who don't feel it's necessary. And the other thing to remember is that surgery or that kind of transitioning, it doesn't make a trans person any more or less trans. And so what you've got to remember is, if it's not a question that you'd ever feel comfortable answering, it's something you probably shouldn't ask. Why do you want to know what my private parts look like? You know?
Right.
Why do you want to and the answer is curiosity. Human beings are naturally very curious. They want to know. They want to complete a puzzle. But I'm a trans person. I'm not a puzzle. Like, I burp and fart like everyone else. You know? But do I really have to answer these really invasive questions around what my private parts look like or what procedures I've had done? It almost seems like when people ask me that question, like, have you had the surgery? Have you had the sex change, which is the worst way to describe it? It makes me wonder, like, they're actually thinking of the surgery. They're actually thinking and putting together by looking at me. Right. What did you look like before? What parts were there before? What made you more masculine before you transitioned? If you're more preoccupied with that, then you're not actually thinking about the person in front of you.
You're just thinking of their body.
You're really thinking of their body, and it's objectification. You would never, ever go up to a cisgender woman and say, what does your vagina look like? How big is your labia? Do you secrete, do you secrete
X, Y, whatever.
You would never ask these questions, right? But for some reason, people are fascinated by medically transitioning with regard to trans folks.
And I think it's because, and this is not to justify it whatsoever at all, but I think hearing you talk right now, it seems that people focus on that is because that's what the only thing that they can see, right? Because they cannot see you come to terms with your, being trans or your life or anything like that. They just base it on physical. And I think overall, everybody has obsessed with how did you physically change. If you physically change and you look like where you're supposed to, right, which another terms that I hate, right, then that kind of justifies, again, you're trans. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, so in the trans community, we talk about passability or passing, and the more updated term now is cisblending. So blending in to look more cisgender, and not everyone does that intentionally. Some people just naturally cisblend, and I think that a lot of cisgender people, they assume that every single trans person is on a mission to blend in and to assimilate. And there are many trans folks, and for them, assimilation is their safety, their personal safety. I cisblend very well, and so that's ensured that I've had steady employment. It's ensured that I've been able to do the work that I do. But there are trans folks who don't cisblend. It doesn't make them any less trans. The worst thing I've heard, like a cisgender person say to a trans person is, well, if you don't look enough like a woman, then why are you doing this? If you can't look like a woman or you can't look like a man, then you're not fooling anyone. And the whole reality is, like, I don't live my life in fear. I don't live for other people. I live for myself. My expression, this has more to do with me and how I want others to see how I feel inside.
Yeah.
People forget that part.
Right.
Every person on this planet has a gender identity. You may not have to think about it, but trans folks do.
Which is a privilege.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And you may not have to think about it, but it does exist. And, you know, what you're wearing today, like this shirt that you're wearing, does it have anything to do with what's going on in between your legs? And the answer is no. You made a decision about that shirt. You went out and got that shirt.
I got it
Which
from a
is
conference.
fabulous.
I got it from a trans conference.
Oh.
Yes. I wanted to wear it.
Oh, yes.
It's so cute. I love it.
But you got that shirt. You made a decision to wear that shirt because it's something that you like. It's something that fits well. And it's not necessarily indicative of anything other than you wanting to wear it. And there may be times where you go into a department store and you go to the men's section to buy things, or you may go to the women's section to buy things. All of those things are indicative of how you express yourself, not who you have sex with. Whether you become aroused at the sight of a penis has nothing to do with those things.
How much of a man or a woman you are.
How much of a man or woman you are. And let's
however you
also
identify.
talk about genderqueer folks and non-binary and non-conforming folks. You know, they've existed since the beginning of time, since the beginning of human civilization. You have people like Wewa, who was born in the late 1800s, who was a two-spirit person. And in her tribe, right in New Mexico, not that far from here, she was seen as the leader. She was seen as the most learned, the most intelligent in her tribe. And it's Western culture and it's European culture that said, this is what boys have to look like. Colonization. This is what boys have to look like. This is what girls have to look like. Gender diversity doesn't exist. But it's existed since before all of us got here.
Right. So when we reduce trans folks and just focus on, you know, their body parts or their physical transition, what type of impact does this create on trans folks or gender non-conforming?
Number one, it breeds internalized transphobia, because knowing that people are preoccupied with my physical appearance, it makes me want to cisblend even more, so people aren't preoccupied with that. And it also makes me not want to be out sometimes in spaces that feel like they're not intended for me. It makes me feel like I can't focus on what's really going on in my community, which is Black trans women in this country don't see 35. I mean, the life expectancy of a trans woman of color in the United States is 35. I'm 35. We're not talking about that because people are still preoccupied with genitals. And people are still preoccupied with seeing gender identity and gender diversity as mental health issues and things that don't exist.
Right.
You know, so when we focus too much on what's going on between my legs and what's going on, you know, as far as my gender dysphoria, which is not a mental health issue.
So we have to label it that.
It's
just
labeled as mental illness, but in reality, gender dysphoria is not a mental illness. You can look up the DSM-5 for the medical condition. But when people preoccupy themselves with that, it makes me preoccupied with that. And I can't focus on being the whole and loving human being I am, because I'm a full-time student. I'm a full-time national trainer. I'm a national scholar. I go around the country and
She didn't like that either.
I know. I have all of these other things that are part of my identity. And yet, time and time again, the moment I bring up the fact that I'm trans, it's the only thing that we discuss. It's the only thing that ever comes up. You know, I'm an aunt. I have 25 nieces and nephews.
Oh my God.
I know, isn't that crazy?
It is crazy.
And I have these conversations with my nieces all the time because people focus so much on their appearance.
Right.
And so it makes them self-conscious. And it's like so many women understand when people are preoccupied and objectify you because of your body, it makes you self-conscious about your body and body image stuff. And so why would you do that to a trans person?
Right.
You can talk about, the advice I would give for anybody is, if you're going to talk to someone trans, talk about anything. You don't have to just talk about being transgender or how hard it must be or how difficult it must be. That's sympathy. And we do not need sympathy. Sympathy doesn't save us from being murdered. That doesn't help. find some common ground. Talk to us about our interests. Talk about what you're doing in the community to demonstrate your allyship. This is allyship. This is allyship. Now that I see that this is a safe space for me, I'm going to talk about other things. I'm going to talk about how cute this dog is.
Right.
But, if you understand intersectionality and you understand that sexual orientation and gender identity and expression are just one part of everyone's identity, then you understand that to bring only that issue up is objectifying, and it makes me feel as a trans person that that's really all you see. You don't see that I come from a certain socioeconomic background. You don't see that I'm black. You don't see that I'm a woman. You don't see that I am someone who's family oriented. You don't see the geography that I come from.
Yeah.
All of those things. If you ever took statistics, they talk about the proportions.
Right.
And how the proportions add up to one.
Right.
And it's like all those proportions that make the whole. Me being trans, that's just one proportion. So a lot of cis folks just have to start understanding that me being trans, yes, and what? I'm trans and.
Okay. You mentioned the word cis gender. Can you explain what cisgender means?
So cisgender is the direct opposite of transgender. So someone who's cisgender means that the parts that you were born with or parts you were assigned, you mentally and internally have congruency with those. So you have direct alignment with that. So what's in between your legs and what's in between your ears are in a direct match. Transgender is the exact opposite of that. So the parts you were assigned, you do not have a connection to those, or you may feel that those parts are not right for you.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So just kind of like, I guess, for another important thing for people out there to understand and learn, something that I always find also offensive is when people, especially cisgender folks, tend to say, oh, they're tricking, they're deceiving trans folks, right? When in the end, I mean, I know this, but that's never the intention, right? Can you explain that, elaborate that?
Yes, so there's this idea that, specifically when it comes to dating, that, and we see this happening more often with trans women than trans men, that trans women have this very unique experience of having to disclose that they're trans. And what goes on for me as a trans person is you think to yourself, someone finds you attractive and you're finding that you have some sort of synergy, you have mutual attraction, and you may not feel that it is safe to actually come out as trans. You may actually fear being assaulted. I mean, as of now, we have 18 transgender women who have been murdered in this country since January. 17 of those have been transgender women of color. And many of these incidents happen with intimate partner violence and domestic violence. And so what happens is people start coming up with, if you remember, the gay panic defense.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So there's also the trans panic defense. Oh my gosh, I did not know that they were really a man.
Right.
And it made me enraged. And so because I was so enraged, they had to die. I had to become physically assaulted. And there's just no excuse for it. Now, what happens for trans folks is what often happens within the HIV/AIDS community. There's been so much shame about being trans and so much that people don't understand about being trans that a lot of trans folks are afraid to come out of fear of being rejected.
I really appreciate you having a conversation about this because, especially in this era that we're living in, here in the United States and other countries as well, I know that there's a lot of misunderstandings or, and lack of wanting to understand trans folks and gender non-conforming. And so I really hope folks, take the time to, to understand a little bit more. I also would encourage people to not just when you meet a trans person to just try to, have them educate you. There's videos like this, there's books, you can do your research. But I really appreciate you engaging in this conversation with me. Thank you. Do you have any final advice any final words for anyone watching this video?
It's you. One thing I'll say is if you're going to be an ally of the queer community and more specifically of the trans community, then really think about who's in your circle. If you're an ally, who shows up in your life that actually represents your allyship? Do you actually have trans friends? Or do you just say, I support these issues?
Right.
And then from afar, you don't really actually live that truth. So I would say, like, make some trans friends, get to know some trans folks. And also, like, get your pronouns right. Like, if I say anything to anybody, get your pronouns right.
Right.
Because that is such a barrier with trans folks. Like, these pronouns have existed for a while now, and it's not about your comfort anymore. That if you're trying to be mindful of gender diversity and the queer community, you have to recognize that it's comprised of people who may not identify as just he and she. And don't judge a book by its cover, literally. Gender perception, you can be wrong about it all the time. You know how many times I've walked down the street and thought, oh, that is a queen. That is like, I know you are a part of my community, and I've been dead wrong. It's all based on how we perceive people in the community. We may see certain mannerisms, we may see how they express their gender, and we make an assumption. Are we right a lot of the time? Is our queer dog right? A lot of the times.
Many times.
But don't make assumptions. You might be wrong.
Right. That's very true. Well, thank you again for joining us today. Another episode of Closeted Conversations. Again, just remind you that go ahead and subscribe, like, follow, all the good things. There's a link right there. And we'll have your information below so you can also reach out. But yeah, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.